Today, we're going to walk through the different stages of a real-life cyber attack that happened in Turkey in 2019. In our lesson today, we're going to explore a user case scenario of an attack. We'll walk through the different stages, including reconnaissance, initial access, executions, lateral movements, to the final step of stealing credentials. We'll also explain the difference between Telnet and SSH network protocols used to remotely access and manage devices. Your task once we've finished our lesson today is to carry out a brief search on the different forms of cyber espionage that happened between 2019 and 2020. We're now going to examine a case of cyber espionage against Turkey in 2019. The case we're looking at is known as APT. Did you know that an APT is an advanced persistent threat, which is a prolonged and targeted cyber attack in which an intruder gains access to a network and remains undetected for an extended period of time? In this attack, the attacker group gained an initial foothold, then swept the internal network looking for valuable assets and vulnerability. This enabled them to elevate privileged user credentials and to look for and steal customer data by moving laterally within the system. In this attack, the threat actor was able to exfiltrate the system with the data and avoid detection. The Turkey attack was recorded in 2019, but after further investigation, it was discovered that the first compromise actually happened way back in 2016. The initial compromise started with exploiting a web application to gain a foothold on the host servers. By deploying China Chopper 4 and JSP Spy 5 web shells, the threat actor was able to gain access into the host system. A web shell is a piece of code or a script running on a server that enables remote administration. Web shells are a great tool for attackers to easily control and monitor their targets while remaining undetected. Let's have a quick look at an attacker-controlled web shell. Here we can see attacks at software level in which scripting in Bash, JavaScript, Python, and Ruby, among others, are used as attack vectors and build attacking tools. The threat group would then launch a series of reconnaissance commands to learn a lot about their targeted system. Commands like these. As can be seen here in the next step, is that tools like DNS.exe would be used to view the domain the host is registered under. With these tools, the threat group can issue queries to the domain controller and issue a DNS request to acquire the domain name from the domain controller. Running this tool gives the threat actor a good idea which domains to target. In the execution phase of the attack, to exfiltrate critical data from the victim's environment, the threat actor then has to carry a sort of bridge between the two network segments. As can be seen here in the attack against Turkey, an executable file like java.exe was used to compromise the hosts. Threat actors use various ways to load malware into a legitimate network. A common way is through the use of Dynamic Link Library, or DLL, which can load legitimate binary memory with malicious ones. The threat actors in the Turkey case study also executed an offensive known security tool to steal login credentials in the victim's network. They used Quarks PWDump and Mimikatz to extract and dump logon credentials in plain or clear text. When an attributable malicious code is executed properly with the correct access on a system, threat actors are able to launch an attack remotely by triggering an executable function in the code remotely while the vulnerable system is connected to a network. In most cases, the threat actor will use an automated tool to increase the chances of elevating their access through the malicious code so that they can gain full control of the victim's system. The threat actors who launch these kind of attacks mostly work in large groups. They make use of advanced automated script to gain control of the victim's system. Remote arbitrary code is mostly used to gain remote user administrative access on a vulnerable system. Before staging the attack, the threat actors would have to have carried out a proper reconnaissance on the vulnerable system using an automated scanning tool to map the entire network and find all the vulnerable, outdated versions of software that are running. In most cases, the reconnaissance stage of any attack is the longest and most vital step for the threat actor. Once they have identified all the vulnerability, they would then exploit them to gain local administrative access to the system. They do this by deploying an executed script on the system, which enables them to perform the automated execution. On host networks, an executable file connected to a list of IPs is a rather clever way of obtaining user credentials remotely. Basically, threat actors can harvest the credentials from the Chrome browser in the management application's credentials the users have saved in their browser. Once the attacker has gained local administrative access to the system, they can mask their presence in the network, hiding from the legitimate local administrator. This would happen in the case of credential theft, when a threat actor harvests credentials from the Chrome browser. The threat actor actively monitors the victim's network, but using automated tools to violate the geo-infeasible logins. So for a short period, the attacker can remotely harvest those credentials from the browser despite geographically disparate locations. The credentials could include information such as keywords, words typed while on the browser, saved passwords, passwords of web pages that were saved on the browser, recent web pages visited, email addresses, and telephone directory, for example, from the browser. Once the threat actor has successfully harvested the credentials they need, they would use these credentials to elevate their access to the other accounts harvested earlier. In our next lesson, we will be exploring a brute force attack. Brute force attacks basically involve guessing usernames and passwords to gain access to a system. It's a very simple attack method with a high success rate. You will see just how easy it is once you have the right technical know-how to break into a network just like a threat actor. We're going to end this lesson by looking at Telnet and SSH network protocols. Both are used to connect remote servers, and we're going to explore their traffic using Wireshark. Telnet is the standard TCP/IP protocol for virtual terminal service, while SSH or Secure Shell enables users to log into another computer over a network to execute commands in a remote machine. So clearly, Telnet is vulnerable to security attacks, while SSH can overcome many security issues. In this demo, we'll take you through the installation of an SSH open server on Linux. We will compare and examine the traffic between Telnet and SSH to demonstrate why SSH is more secure and preferred due to its use of public key encryption for authentication. In this demo, we will be talking about Telnet and SSH. So we will be examining both the Telnet and SSH traffic on Wireshark. We will be basically capturing traffic on our network where we try to telnet into another machine virtually. And we'll do the same for SSH as well. So what exactly is Telnet? In simple terms, I would say Telnet is a text-oriented communication system that is used on the terminal and allows the user to connect remotely to another machine. So basically, Telnet actually works with the TCP protocol and runs on port 23. The benefit of this demo is that you will be able to actually see the difference between these two network protocols, and you'll know the reason why SSH is preferred over Telnet in a network environment. So what exactly is SSH? SSH basically means secure shell. And a secure shell is mostly preferred in a network environment because it has some benefits. Now, one of the benefits we're going to be highlighting while we are conducting this demo is SSH has encryption. So basically, with every packet we send during communication, the data is being encrypted. So we will see the difference between the SSH and Telnet. For us to actually physically do the demo, we would need to go into our virtual box. And while we are connected on our virtual box, we can simply go into our Ubuntu machine. And in a moment, you can actually see I'm logged in on my Ubuntu, and you can see that it's running. So I'm simply just going to jump into my Ubuntu machine. So to carry this out now, I would actually need to do a few things. So the first thing I would do would be to install Telnet on my machine, because by default, Ubuntu doesn't have this pre-installed. And there are two ways you can do this. We can either Telnet into online server, or we can actually Telnet into our local hosts, which would be more preferable. So you can physically conduct a Telnet session with your own machine. So you would connect to your own self while on the Telnet. I know it sounds confusing, but we will actually see what I mean as we go through it. Okay, so first of all, we seem to be just going through the terminal. And now we have a terminal open, and we can just check to see if we're actually using the latest software for Ubuntu. So we put in a few commands. lsb_release space -a. Okay, so at the moment, we're currently using the Ubuntu 20.04.1 LTS, which is a very recent distribution of Linux. Now I'm actually going to install Telnet, and how do I do this? Simply on the terminal. So I would put in the command sudo to elevate my privilege. So I put in sudo space apt-get space install space telnet. And a D. Okay, now we're asked for my password, just to confirm that I am an administrator. So I would put in my password. In a moment, you can see Telnet has been installed. And to confirm this, I can simply run another command to see the network connections for transmission control protocol, which it would be able to Telnet into on my machine. So to do this, I would simply put in the command netstat space -tlpn. And now you can see at the moment, this is the IP address of our localhost DNS server that I actually telnetted into. So for me to turn it into my local host, you can actually see it has a PID. Now, the PID stands for the process ID. It's running on a TCP. And you can see this is the IP address 127 space 2.0 space 2.053. And you can see there is a column in here. So this column basically just shows you the ports it's actually running on. In this case, it's running on ports 53, which is our DNS. So how do we actually test our localhost DNS server? by running the command telnet 127.0.0.53 space /53, and 53 represents our DNS port. We should get a connection closed by foreign host error, which is a good sign. It shows we're able to connect with Telnet, but not the DNS server due to our system configuration. So we actually got an error, and that's totally fine. We need to start Wireshark, so simply just give some space and we put in our command. The command is sudo space Wireshark. So at the moment you can see where it started, and we're going to be capturing traffic on our lookback now. Our lookback basically has an IP address. It's 127.0.0.1. So basically, this is going to be the interface we're going to be capturing our telnet session on. So I'm just going to start the capture so that when we do get any traffic, we can actually analyze the traffic. So I simply just click on the loopback, which is LO, and click on Start Capture. So it's going to start capturing in every traffic that is on our loopback. So at the moment, I'm going to go back to my terminal. And I'm actually going to open a new terminal. And simply type the command telnet space localhost. And now you can see there is a prompt. This prompt is asking for my username for this machine. So I'm just going to put in my username. And put in my password. And you can see there is a prompt saying the password is incorrect. Don't worry about that. This was done just to generate a lot of telnet traffic on our Wireshark. So I'm going to put in multiple password credentials again to generate more telnet traffic. Please note you don't have to type my login credentials. You can use your own random credentials to generate traffic. Now you can see all our wrong credentials entered. This has packets to actually analyze on Wireshark. So we can simply jump back into our Wireshark and stop to capture. Okay, so now you can see we have a lot of captured traffic. So we can actually analyze all of this traffic. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. We can analyze this by going onto our filter and simply typing the word telnet. And then we will be able to filter all the traffic on telnet. So at the moment, we have filtered all traffic, and you can actually see all the protocols we've left are just telnet. And you can see both the sender IP address and the destination IP address, which is 127.0.0.1. And it is our loopback IP address. So basically, these are all the telnet sessions that we actually captured. So what I'm actually looking for is my telnet data. And luckily, it is the first one here. So we simply right-click on it and go to Follow TCP Stream. Okay, so if you look at this packet, you can see something really obvious. You can see my password credentials in plain text. And you can see everything I typed in while on the terminal. So every traffic we captured now is actually encrypted. So if someone was actually sniffing on our network while we were connected on a web server and we had telnet into the server from our traffic, they would be able to see all of our username and password credentials while we're logging into a telnet session. And they can see everything we do when we're connected to the web server. Now that we've actually seen the telnet traffic, I'm simply just going to close the Ubuntu. Okay guys, we're going to be working on the SSH session now. And we're going to start by logging into our workstation to capture traffic on the SSH session. Okay, at the moment our workstation has started, so we just put in our password and enter. We would be doing exactly the same thing we did on the telnet, but this time we're going to be using this machine. So we're simply going to go into our terminal, and I would like to make this bigger. So first we need to start our Wireshark using the command sudo space Wireshark -GTK. Again, that's sudo space Wireshark space -GTK. Enter, and we put in our password. And enter. And Wireshark has started. And we can do exactly the same thing we did on our telnet session. So we are going to be capturing traffic on our lookback interface as well. Okay, so basically Wireshark has started, and we can open a new terminal by clicking on this and maximizing it. We're just going to zoom in and put in the command SSH space localhost and enter. So at the moment we have a prompt and we type in yes and enter. So now we need to put in our password, and our password is CyberOps. And enter. So at the moment we have successfully logged in on an SSH session. And you might not notice because of the way it looks, but we basically just connected to ourselves. So there isn't much difference. But you can see on the terminal the timestamp when we actually started an SSH session. So if we go into our Wireshark, you can see there is a lot of traffic in the air. And this traffic you see is this computer trying to connect to this computer. I know it may sound confusing, but for a real-life scenario, you will be connecting to the website. For example, if you had a web server hosted online, let's give an example, then the IP address of the web server, and let's imagine the IP address is 191.135.43.79. So this is the IP address of the web server. You can just put in SSH and this IP address and enter, and that would connect you to that web server. If that was a real-life web server, we could just go back now to our Wireshark and stop the capture because we have a lot of data already. And because we have a lot of data already, we can simply just filter our data to actually inspect the protocol of the SSH. I'm going to maximize this and I'm going to zoom a little bit in. Okay, so this is actually much better. And now we are going to the filter file and we put in SSH. So you can see that this is the protocol, but in this case, you can see we are using SSH v2. So what does this basically stand for? It's just the version 2, meaning there is a version 1 and a version 2. So this is the newer version of the inter-session protocol. So basically type in the NH on the server, and we can actually view the traffic that we have there. So at the moment, you can see this is all the segments of data that contain SSH. So to start inspecting the packets, we can simply just follow the TCP stream. And when we do open that, you can see something straight away. Now, every text we have in here is all gibberish. So what this means is that they don't make sense. You know, if you actually remembered when we explored the telnet session, you can see we're actually able to see the username and password. Right, well, in this case, you can see what we have in here is just gibberish. There are no texts that are understandable to humans. All the text, all the data we have within this segment of the packet is encrypted. So you can see the benefits of actually using the SSH rather than using telnet. And in a real-life environment, you would try to encourage the use of each because the encryption helps to protect the integrity of the data that is seen on a network. So we can actually dig a little deeper and we could come down to the protocol. And we can see it's currently running on a protocol which is SSH 2.0, which is the new version of the SSH. And we can see the SSH actually runs with the TCP. And you can see there was a three-way handshake that was done before establishing a connection session. So remember, when we analyzed the TCP traffic, you could remember we had an SYN, synchronize, SYN-ACK, synchronize, acknowledge, and acknowledge ACK. So basically just the three-way handshake that was actually being carried out in the process. So if you look, you can see the sequence number that's useful for error checking. And you can see the port. So it's been used, and we can see the destination port. These are all the flags which are within the segment of the packet. And now we can actually see the IP. And in this case, we're actually using the IPv6. So in this case, you can notice the IPv6 is a little bit different from the IPv4. And if you remember from the notes, we called IPv6, and this is actually the purpose of the representation of the IP address, 127.0.01. So you can see we have 2 semicolons. So basically, that's the representation of the lookback address on the IPv6. And you can see the timestamp. So if you do remember, in our previous lesson, we did cover the encapsulation of an Ethernet frame. And we talked about the different properties that we can actually find within the Ethernet frame. You may remember we talked about a timestamp. We talked about the flags, we talked about the sequence number, and lots more. Now, if we do investigate more deeply into all the packets, we will have exactly the same standard encryption going through all the data. So basically, the entire communication between the client and the server, or the server and the server, or the clients to the client session will all be encrypted. So you will have the encryption of data going from end to end. But in the case of the telnet, it was totally different. In the telnet session, we were able to see the content of the traffic being sent, all while trying to connect on the server. So that wraps up this demo. And in the next demo, we will be going through some more interesting things.